Hello, my name is Helen. I'm the author of a book called Moving Forwards, Working Backwards, a strengths-based approach to neurodivergence. Usually in my podcasts, I try and look more at the complexity of neurodivergence in a Venn diagram form with all the overlaps that shape who we are and how we identify across neurodiversity. Today, I'm just going to focus on ADH. I identify as ADH. I'm very passionate about neurodivergence and understanding it more, but also about changing the language that we just often use without even thinking. So my thinking is that if someone is going to be recognised, usually called diagnosed, then to hear words like deficit and disorder and neurological condition, these things aren't going to make you feel good about yourself. Now, I'm not going to minimise some of the struggles that neurodivergent people have, and I think even the reasons for that are complex. But my choice of word, and I welcome everyone to keep working with language and finding their own descriptions, is ADH, attention divergent and highly sensitive. So today I want to say a few words about a couple of books that have taken my attention in relation to ADH. One very recently published by a young Australian journalist, Matilda Boseley, The Year I Met My Brain, and one that was published a few years ago by Gabor, Scattered Minds. Both these people are recognised as ADH. Both are respected writers in their field. So I really want to acknowledge any contribution to this field. And as always, there are many things that I valued and enjoyed when I read these books. But there's a couple of points that I want to pick up on that I think need to be robustly examined. And recently in Brisbane, I had the good fortune to go and hear Gabor speak. And so much of what he said, and he's always said, about the connection between mind, body, heart, gut, the holistic approach to understanding ourselves, the field of addiction, which is particularly common with neurodivergent people, especially ADH people. He is very wise and draws from amazing experience. To have discovered that he's ADH at 55 and explore that wonderful. One of the things I valued about what he said in his book, which I drew into mine, is the idea that ADHs often have very strong will, and that parents and educators, without realizing that they're in neurodivergent territory, because there's a lot of highly adapted kids and adults who aren't recognized, will exert counter will. Now, it's kind of a normal part, I suppose, of trying to get kids to do what you want them to do. But his argument is with ADHs, it's going to backfire a lot more. I'm not going to go into that in a big way, but the point is that there were many ideas that I value. So I was quite horrified to realize that he then set up an hypothesis that ADH is as a result of trauma. And although he tried to soften his argument after using the word mother to say that really he was referring to all parents who mother. He is a man of his time, perhaps, but I found it really offensive on two fronts. One, it's still a very small step to go into mother blaming in our cultures. And really, there's been so much great feminist work in the field of psychology about challenging the practice of mother blaming when there's something that's not going so well for our children. So, yeah, Gabor, I wish you hadn't done that. But this whole idea of trauma as the source of ADH, and he actually ended his talk with doubling down on that statement. I was too tired and cranky to try and get a question in, and you don't change people's minds that quickly anyway. Uh, but one of the things that so many people don't look at is the commonality of an overlap between ADH and AS. Again, this talk isn't about that, but I will come back to that at another date. But really what he seems to keep drawing on in his book and in his talks is about the trauma he experienced as an infant when the Nazis were invading his country and all the babies started to cry, and the infants pick up the trauma of their parents and their culture. Absolutely get on board with that. Two of his children are ADH, but he is completely unwilling to see any genetic link with that. Now, I worked backwards for myself in understanding my ADH, first of all with my son and my niece, and then really, once you see something, it's hard to not see it. So there's a lot of neurodivergence in my family. I don't come from a deficit or pathologizing place. I can see the strengths and struggles. I wish that I'd understood myself through that lens when I was young. No one knew. I think it could have helped a lot of people in my family, including me. But I think there's been practices in my life through therapy and addressing trauma, even the work I do as a therapist, which is very much about bringing my propensity to have a scattered mind into, I think, a strengths-based platform where I can hear a lot of things and center myself and support someone else to draw that picture into something cohesive. So, I understand that there are a lot of people whose struggles with ADH have been and continue to be very painful. And I think a big part of it is trying to fit into neurotypical benchmarks, especially when you don't realize that you're neurodivergent, and then will adopt a set of beliefs that affect self-esteem, like you're stupid, that there's something wrong with you. So Gabor really don't understand the limited thinking. I guess we all have blind spots, even in the most intelligent of us. But logically, if that was the case, that his ADHDness was caused as a result of the trauma of the Nazi invasion and the terrible impact on his family and his culture, then that would suggest that all the people around him growing up would experience the same thing and develop ADH traits. I'm probably sensitive to that argument, as all mothers of neurodivergent children will be, because it comes back to blaming us for them being this way. The field of epigenetics is very relevant. I mean, I can see that our environment can shape how much ADH qualities will impact on us. So, if you are very well supported, your anxiety is understood, your sensitivity is supported, you have consistency, you have an absence of emotional, physical, sexual abuse in your family, then, these things are going to, at some level, mean your ADH qualities will be less impactful. And of course, the similar correlate that if you're an ADH kid and you're growing up in a very unstable, abusive environment, that's going to make you more vulnerable to acting out your trauma, and perhaps the ADH component of that may be being more impulsive, risk-taking. But this cause and effect thinking, it really bothers me, makes no sense to me. So I think one of the things that happens with people like Gabor Mate, who have such power of influence, is it's like the emperor's new clothes. It's like you love so much of what he says, so then this idea gets slipped in, and then people kind of integrate it in some way without questioning it. I went looking for challenges to that idea, and I didn't see enough. And so anyway, I'm putting my voice forward about that. I would say trauma can exacerbate some aspects of neurodivergence. Neurodivergent kids are more vulnerable to trauma, it would seem. But at the end of the day, to say that a scattered mind, his words, is as a direct result of trauma is very egocentric. He's taking his one experience and extrapolating. We're all at risk of doing that when we discover something about ourselves. It's all valuable, but you shouldn't generalize. This is a bit cheeky, and I do wonder every time I see him about the overlap of ADHD and autism, and again, I don't see that in a stigmatized way, but if I had a conversation with Gabor or Matilda, I would love to say, hey, maybe you need to look at this for yourself as well. Anyway, I want to quickly mention Matilda Boseley's book. Look, I've just read this book, and this is a young woman I would love to meet in terms of her, personable style. And I think a lot of those ADHD qualities, where being highly relational and emotional and honest about your experience is very common. And sometimes it can feel too much for people who aren't used to that level of openness and honesty. So, yeah, and she's a great writer, so I enjoyed her book. I felt concerned again about the pathologizing of her experience. I can see that her being recognised fairly recently is enormously helpful to her, and anything that she writes about in terms of hacks to help people get more organised and feel better about themselves, yes, all up for it, whatever works. I just found myself struggling with how often she referred to herself in pathologizing the descriptions. So neurological condition was something she used a lot. She does talk about, towards the end especially, she's understanding that there are some wonderful ways about her in the world that are probably related to her neurodivergence. And I really enjoyed what she had to say about medication and her drawing on current research in many aspects of exploring this territory, but particularly the medication area. And also just a reminder about the statistics, her acknowledgement that because people don't see themselves positively as unrecognised ADHs, then it's going to have often profound and devastating effects, like, the higher suicide rate, the higher tendency to be in accidents. And sadly, I think not great at remembering statistics, but this was one that stood out for me, that something like 2.6% of the population, again, we don't really know because there's so many people unrecognised ADH, but 26.6% of people in jails are ADH. A lot of people end up in jails because they do impulsive things, their self-esteem is low, they haven't found their path in life, because often ADHs will keep starting something and not finishing it and then feeling worse about themselves. And I think there's a whole lot of factors that create this perfect storm where you end up in a legal system, a judicial system that still hasn't improved. There's so little support therapeutically in our institutions. But that could start me on another topic, which I'll save for another day. So, Matilda, yeah, love your work, love your courage in coming out and talking about your own experience. I just wish that there was more of a strengths-based approach, because I don't think a strengths-based approach minimises the struggles that we go through. Some of the laugh out loud moments that you've recognised your ADH, I really relate to, especially when I was young. I had so many accidents. I was always doing things that weren't intentional, but I now see come from my ADH that make people laugh. And And in a way, that developed a strength in me because I learned to laugh at myself. And that probably offset that great vulnerability to justice and rejection sensitivity, which can mean you don't want to laugh at yourself. You take things really deeply to heart. So, a lot to be said on that topic. But as Matilda acknowledged, it's still not in the checklist if you do an assessment of being ADH, which seems crazy to me because every ADHer I know, including myself, from mild to extreme, because everything's on a continuum, experiences rejection and justice sensitivity. And if you don't know what that is, I'll do another podcast on it. So, yeah, perhaps I should finish there, but I have a desire to tell a little story along the lines that Matilda talks about, where you're being out of awareness, focusing on getting a quick outcome or having the social and emotional connection at the expense of your awareness can get you to do things that might make people laugh, but actually probably part of ADH. So when I was in my 20s, my friends and 30s, to be fair, would often joke they needed to give me a plastic cup at a party because they gave me a glass one. It would always end up broken, not intentionally. Anyway, this particular night, my friends were making a joke of giving me a plastic wine glass in the kitchen. And as they gave it to me and we were all laughing, my elbow went backwards and neatly hit the stem of a wine glass, and the top of the wine glass flew to one side of the kitchen and the stem to the other. And it was just one of those moments where, yep, it happened again. So I'd like to end it there. Once you recognise your ADHDness or autism or being a Julie, there are so many stories, usually from people's past, that help them understand this territory more. I guess I've chosen to comment on these two books because I'm very passionate about a strengths-based approach that challenges the very present stigma and pathologizing in language, in books, in the way people feel about themselves, in the diagnostic criteria, which is not to criticise these books in their entirety. I think any contribution is welcome. We're all still working it out. And these wonderful writers contribute to the field. I hope that my book, available also now in audio, contributes to the field. And I want us to keep having rich and helpful conversations about neurodivergence. Thank you.